She came only as the cowboy's Christmas cook, until she changed his life forever. The winter morning was crisp and quiet, the kind of cold that made the world seem as if it were holding its breath. Snow had fallen overnight, covering the wide stretches of the ranch in a thick, soft blanket of white. Each tree, fence, and barn roof wore a coat of frost that sparkled faintly in the pale sunlight. The ranch itself, usually a place of constant movement and noise, was unusually still. The cowboy who lived there, a man in his late 30s with a rugged face shaped by years of outdoor work, stood by the barn door, gazing at the horizon. He had lived on this ranch for most of his adult life, tending to the land and animals, and in all that time he had grown accustomed to being alone. His days were simple: feed the animals, repair the fences, check on the cattle, and ensure the land was safe and well kept. It was a life of routine, and he liked it that way. Yet, deep inside, there was a quiet emptiness he hadn't yet allowed himself to acknowledge. This morning, however, promised a small but unexpected change. A woman was arriving at the ranch, not as a visitor, not as a family member, but as someone hired specifically to cook for Christmas. She was to stay only for a short time, just long enough to help with the festive preparations. And yet the cowboy felt a strange flutter of curiosity as he waited at the edge of the driveway, watching the snow crunch under his boots. Her arrival was announced by the soft sound of tires against the snow and the crunch of boots on the frozen ground. When she stepped out of her car, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that immediately caught his attention. She was not tall, but there was a strength in the way she moved, as if she were ready to take on any challenge that came her way. Her hair, tied back simply, caught the sunlight and framed a face that was friendly, alert, and observant. She carried a large bag filled with cooking tools, ingredients, and the small personal items that made a temporary home feel more comfortable. The cowboy walked toward her, his boots leaving clear tracks in the fresh snow. "You must be the cook," he said, his voice steady but slightly wary. There was no warmth in his words, just a straightforward acknowledgement of her presence. He had worked with people before, hired temporary hands, and knew the kind of misunderstandings that could arise when strangers entered his world. "Yes," she replied, smiling politely. "I'm glad to be here. I've heard a lot about this place. It's beautiful." Her words were simple, yet genuine, and they carried an unspoken promise. She was here to work, yes, but she was also aware of the life around her, and seemed willing to understand it. The cowboy led her toward the house, pointing out where she could store her things, and showing her the kitchen. The house itself was modest but warm, with a large stone fireplace at the center and windows that looked out onto the vast expanse of snowy fields. She paused for a moment to take in the view, the quiet serenity of the landscape offering a strange comfort. She could feel the peace of the place, but she also sensed the loneliness that had become part of the cowboy's life. As she unpacked her bags, the cowboy went about his morning chores, occasionally glancing back to see her navigating the unfamiliar kitchen. She moved with care and attention, handling each tool and ingredient, as if she had done this hundreds of times before. The aroma of fresh bread, spices, and simmering sauces began to fill the air, bringing a warmth that seemed to contrast with the cold outside. It was during these first few hours that the subtle shifts began. The cowboy, initially indifferent and cautious, found himself watching her with a mix of curiosity and surprise. She was efficient, thoughtful, and careful not to intrude where she was not wanted. Yet, in her work, there was a sense of life and energy that was missing from the ranch. Even the old dog that had been lethargically lying by the fireplace perked up when she tossed a small piece of bread his way, wagging his tail and circling her feet. Lunchtime arrived, and the first meal she prepared was simple: a stew with freshly baked bread and a hint of herbs she had brought with her. The cowboy sat at the wooden table quietly eating, unsure if he should compliment her. He had grown used to doing everything himself, and the idea that someone else could do it so well was both strange and oddly comforting. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and she smiled at the small gesture, taking it as encouragement rather than criticism. As the day wore on, snow continued to fall softly, creating a world that felt both magical and isolated. The woman worked tirelessly, moving between the kitchen, the pantry, and the small garden where she could gather fresh herbs. She asked questions about the ranch, the animals, and the cowboys' daily routines, not out of nosiness, but from a genuine desire to understand the life she had temporarily joined. The cowboy, who was used to silence and self-reliance, found himself answering. He spoke about the animals, the land, and the challenges of winter on a remote ranch. At first his words were clipped, cautious, but gradually he began to relax, sharing small stories and memories he had kept to himself for years. He noticed how she listened, really listened, without judgment or interruption, and it struck him how rare that was. By evening, the kitchen was filled with the smells of a meal nearly ready for Christmas. The snow outside had piled high, and the light from the fireplace cast a soft glow across the room. The cowboy leaned against the doorway watching her work, feeling a strange mixture of admiration and gratitude. He realized, perhaps for the first time in a long while, that he did not need to do everything alone, that the presence of another person, even temporarily, could bring a warmth to life that he had forgotten existed. When she finally finished, she cleaned the counters and set the table for dinner, her movements calm and methodical. The cowboy, after a long pause, said, "You're good at this." His words were simple, but they carried weight. For him, praise was not given lightly, and the fact that he acknowledged her effort meant more than she could guess. She smiled again, not overly, just enough to let him know she appreciated it. "Thank you," she said softly. "I enjoy it. Cooking for people, seeing them enjoy it, it's a good feeling." That night, as they sat down to eat, the wind howled softly outside, and the snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in white. Inside, there was a quiet sense of connection forming, fragile but real. It was not yet friendship, nor anything more, but it was a start, a gentle opening of a door that had been closed for too long. As she settled into her small room upstairs, unpacking the last of her things and preparing for the days ahead, she could feel the subtle shift in the air. The cowboy, too, lingered by the fire, thinking about the unexpected presence in his home. Neither of them knew what the next few days would bring, but in that quiet moment, there was a sense of possibility. A feeling that life, even on a remote ranch in the middle of winter, could change in ways neither had anticipated. And so, the first day passed, not with dramatic events or sudden revelations, but with small, meaningful steps. A shared meal, a spark of trust, a moment of understanding. In the stillness of that snowy winter evening, something new had begun. Quietly, subtly, and with a promise of more to come. The morning after her arrival was brighter than the day before. The sun had risen slowly over the snow-covered fields, making the frost sparkle like tiny diamonds. The ranch was alive with the quiet sounds of winter, the low wind through the trees, the soft crunch of snow under the cowboy's boots, and the occasional call of a bird in the distance. The woman awoke early, as was her habit, and quietly prepared herself for the day. She moved softly through the house, careful not to disturb the cowboy still sleeping downstairs. After dressing warmly in layers of wool and cotton, she went downstairs and peeked into the kitchen. The fire in the hearth had burned low overnight, leaving a faint warmth in the room. She smiled to herself, imagining the busy day ahead, and set about her morning routine. She brewed a pot of coffee and boiled water for oatmeal, adding cinnamon and a touch of sugar to make it special. Cooking had always been more than a job for her. It was a way of bringing comfort to others. She believed that even a simple meal could lift spirits, and today, she hoped, it would. The cowboy appeared in the doorway, his hair slightly tousled from sleep and his face marked by the lines of early mornings on the ranch. He nodded at her quietly, not yet fully awake, and went to pour himself a cup of coffee. His movements were slow but deliberate, each action familiar and routine. He had always enjoyed the early hours of the day, a time when the ranch belonged entirely to him, and the quiet allowed for reflection. Yet, this morning, there was something different. He noticed the smell of breakfast, the warm presence of someone else in the house, and felt a subtle shift in the air. They ate breakfast together, not in long conversation, but with small exchanges that hinted at growing familiarity. She asked about the animals he had cared for so long, and he answered, initially in short sentences, but gradually in more detail. He told her about the horses in the barn, the stubborn old mule, and the cows that always seemed to wander farther than they should. He even admitted, reluctantly, that sometimes he worried about keeping the ranch running alone during the harsh winter months. She listened attentively, nodding and asking questions when appropriate. Her curiosity was never intrusive. Instead, it carried a sense of genuine interest and respect. After breakfast, the woman suggested helping with some of the outside chores. At first, the cowboy hesitated. He had always done these tasks alone, and he was used to managing the ranch on his own. Letting someone help felt strange. Yet, when he saw the determination in her eyes, he realized it might be easier with her assistance. Together they went outside, dressed in heavy coats, gloves, and hats, and began the morning work. She followed his instructions carefully, learning quickly which tools to use and how to handle the animals. The old mule eyed her warily, but she remained calm, speaking softly as she fed it hay. The cowboy, observing her, was impressed by her patience and attentiveness. There was no rush, no unnecessary force, only a quiet understanding that the work required care and respect. As the hours passed, the woman and the cowboy worked side by side, completing the morning chores and maintaining the ranch. The cold air stung their faces, but the physical activity kept them warm. There was a rhythm to their work, a natural flow that allowed them to communicate without words at times. Small gestures, a nod, a smile, a hand offered to steady a tool, became part of a silent conversation that neither of them had expected. By late morning, the sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows across the snow. The woman suggested they take a short break, and the cowboy, though not used to stopping in the middle of work, agreed. They sat on a fallen log near the barn, sipping warm water from metal flasks. She pulled a small notebook from her pocket and began sketching the view, the barn, the fields, and the distant hills. He watched her with curiosity, noting the care she took in capturing the details. He had rarely thought of the ranch as something beautiful to draw, only as a place that demanded work. Seeing it through her eyes, even briefly, gave him a new perspective. As the day continued, the woman moved between indoor and outdoor tasks, helping with cooking, feeding the animals, and even clearing snow from the paths. She brought energy and organization to the ranch that had been missing. The cowboy found himself relying on her in small ways, appreciating her suggestions and her willingness to take initiative. He began to recognize that her presence was changing more than just the chores. It was slowly altering the atmosphere of the house and the ranch. Around midday, a small challenge arose. One of the cows had wandered too close to the frozen river, and its hoof was stuck in the snow. The cowboy acted quickly, but the situation required two people to resolve safely. Without hesitation, the woman joined him, following his directions carefully. Together, they guided the cow back to safer ground. The cowboy noticed her steadiness and courage, qualities he had not expected to find in someone hired only as a temporary cook. After the cow was safe, they returned to the house, tired but satisfied with their teamwork. The cowboy offered a rare smile, a small acknowledgement of her help. She responded with a nod and a warm, encouraging smile of her own. Neither of them spoke much during lunch, but there was a new understanding between them, a quiet bond formed through shared effort and mutual respect. The afternoon was spent preparing for Christmas, even though it was still several days away. The woman began planning the menu, organizing ingredients, and baking treats that filled the house with inviting aromas. The cowboy observed her, noting how seamlessly she managed multiple tasks while maintaining a calm and cheerful demeanor. He began to feel a sense of relief that he had not realized he needed. The knowledge that someone else could handle part of the responsibility and do it well made him feel less burdened and more at ease. As the hours passed, they shared small moments of connection. She asked about his past, the reasons he had chosen to live so far from the town and the people he once knew. He spoke slowly, carefully selecting his words. He told her about growing up in the area, about family memories, and about times when life had been difficult. She listened without interruption, responding only with gentle questions that encouraged him to continue. There was no judgment, only attention, and for the first time in a long while he felt heard. The evening came, and the ranch was quiet once more. Snow continued to fall softly, covering the land in a blanket of white. They shared dinner at the large wooden table, the warmth from the fireplace filling the room. The cowboy found himself talking more freely than he had expected. He told small stories from his youth, laughed quietly at moments from the past, and even admitted, with a little embarrassment, that he enjoyed having company in the house. She listened with interest, smiling at his stories, offering small comments that showed understanding and encouragement. Later, as the night deepened, the woman prepared for bed, folding the day's laundry and organizing the kitchen. The cowboy lingered near the fire, thinking about the events of the day. He realized that the woman had done more than just cook and help with chores. She had brought life back into the ranch. The quiet loneliness he had accepted as part of his routine had begun to lift, replaced by a sense of companionship and warmth that was entirely new. Before retiring for the night, he went outside for a moment, standing on the porch and breathing in the cold, crisp air. The snow sparkled under the moonlight, and the ranch looked peaceful and alive in a way it hadn't before. He thought about the woman, about the small ways she had already begun to change things, and felt a strange sense of gratitude. He did not yet know how far her influence would reach, but he knew, without doubt, that life on the ranch would never be the same again. As she lay in her room that night, listening to the soft wind outside, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The first full day had gone better than she had hoped. She had managed the kitchen, helped with the chores, and most importantly, begun to build a connection with the cowboy. She understood the life she had stepped into, a life of hard work, long days, and quiet moments of reflection. But she also knew she could make a positive difference. That thought gave her a sense of purpose and excitement for the days ahead. And so part 2 ended not with dramatic events, but with a steady, meaningful progression. A bond was forming between two people from very different worlds, brought together by circumstance but connected through effort, respect, and shared moments. It was the kind of day that left a quiet impression, a day that would be remembered not for what happened, but for how it felt. The first true step toward change, understanding, and perhaps even something deeper. The next morning began with a quiet stillness that seemed heavier than usual. The snow had stopped falling, but a thick layer covered the ranch, making everything look soft and distant. The sunlight reflected off the white fields, creating a glow that made the world feel both beautiful and slightly isolating. The cowboy stood by the barn, brushing snow off the fence posts, and thought about the day ahead. Life on the ranch had always been hard, but he had grown accustomed to the routine. Yet now, with the woman there, he noticed a subtle difference, a presence that changed the way he approached even simple tasks. The woman was already up when he went inside for coffee. She had made oatmeal with fruit and honey, and the smell of it filled the kitchen. She moved quietly, humming softly to herself, arranging breakfast and preparing for the chores outside. The cowboy watched her from the doorway, impressed by her energy and care. She had quickly adapted to the ranch, learning its routines and understanding its needs. But today, there was something different in the air. A tension, almost invisible, hung over the morning. As they began working outside, a small problem arose. One of the horses, usually calm and steady, had become skittish, tossing its head and pawing at the snow. The cowboy stepped forward to calm it, but the horse reacted nervously. The woman, sensing his concern, stayed close, speaking softly and helping him guide the animal. Her voice, calm and steady, seemed to soothe the horse, and soon it relaxed enough to follow their instructions. The cowboy was surprised, impressed by her ability to remain calm under pressure. He realized she was more than just a temporary cook. She had the patience and strength to handle situations he had long managed alone. After the horse was secure, they returned to the barn to complete their morning chores. As they worked, the woman asked the cowboy about his life before the ranch. At first he hesitated. He was not used to sharing personal details, and his past held moments of pain and regret he rarely spoke about. But her curiosity was gentle, not intrusive, and her listening was patient. Slowly, he began to open up. He spoke about family members he had lost, friends who had moved away, and the loneliness that came from living so far from others. The woman listened without judgment, offering understanding through small gestures, a nod, a thoughtful question, a shared smile. Her presence encouraged him to continue, to share memories he had kept buried for years. He found himself speaking of times he had felt afraid or uncertain, moments when he had doubted himself but had pushed on alone. It was uncomfortable at first, but also freeing. For the first time in a long while, he felt that someone truly understood him, not just his work or his routine, but his thoughts and emotions. By midday, a sudden snowstorm returned, stronger than the night before. The wind blew fiercely, whipping snow across the fields and making it nearly impossible to see far ahead. The cowboy was concerned about the animals, particularly the cows in the distant field. He started to make preparations, bundling up and checking fences to ensure they were secure. The woman insisted on helping, and together they moved quickly, making sure the livestock had food and water, and that the barn doors were fastened against the wind. The storm forced them to stay closer together than usual, and during the effort, the cowboy noticed something he hadn't before: her resourcefulness. She found ways to make tasks easier, suggested solutions calmly, and stayed composed even as the wind and snow made the work harder. He had lived alone for years, but now he realized that he had been missing the kind of partnership she offered, not just in work, but in facing life's challenges together. When they finally returned to the house, wet and cold from the storm, they were both exhausted. The fire in the fireplace was roaring, casting warmth and light across the room. The cowboy, usually silent during meals, began to talk more freely about the difficulties of living on the ranch in winter. She listened, encouraging him to share without offering judgment or advice, unless asked. Her patience allowed him to speak honestly, and it was a relief he had not expected. After lunch, as the storm raged outside, they spent the afternoon inside, tending to tasks that could be done indoors. She cleaned, organized, and began preparing ingredients for dinner, while he repaired tools and fixed small issues that had arisen in the barn. Despite the physical tiredness from the morning, there was a sense of quiet companionship between them. They worked side by side, occasionally exchanging a comment, a laugh, or a simple smile. The bond between them was growing, formed not through dramatic events, but through shared effort, trust, and understanding. In the evening, the storm showed no signs of stopping. The ranch, usually so open and accessible, now felt closed in, like a small world of snow and wind. The cowboy and the woman shared dinner, eating slowly and enjoying the warmth of the fire. Conversation shifted to lighter topics, memories of past holidays, favorite foods, and small personal quirks. He laughed more than he had in months, and she enjoyed seeing him relax in a way that made him almost unrecognizable from the serious, solitary man he often seemed to be. After dinner, they moved to the living room. The woman brought a blanket for the cowboy, who had never been particularly comfortable with displays of care or attention. He accepted it quietly, a small sign of trust. They sat together in the soft glow of the fire, listening to the wind outside, and for a while there was no need for words. The silence was comforting, shared, and full of unspoken understanding. Later, the woman asked if he would tell her about his favorite childhood memories. He was hesitant at first, but gradually he spoke of the small joys he had experienced growing up, fishing by the river with his father, watching sunsets over the hills, and helping his mother bake bread in the kitchen. These were simple memories, but they carried a warmth and tenderness he had long forgotten. She listened intently, occasionally commenting with a smile or nod, letting him know she valued what he shared. That night before going to bed, the cowboy reflected on the day's events. The storm had forced them together, and in facing the challenge, he had discovered a strength and companionship he had not anticipated. The woman had brought more than her skills in cooking and organization. She had brought understanding, patience, and the ability to listen without judgment. He realized that the ranch and his life were not the same as they had been. A shift had begun, small but significant, and he could feel it in the quiet moments when the storm was loud outside but calm filled the room inside. The woman, lying in her room, thought about the day as well. She understood the hardships of ranch life, and she had felt the weight of them in the cold, snowy hours. But she also felt satisfaction in being able to help, to contribute, and to connect. She recognized the walls the cowboy had built around himself over the years, and she saw that even in small ways, those walls were beginning to soften. Her presence, she realized, could make a difference not only in the daily work, but in the quiet moments of life that mattered most. The storm continued through the night, but inside the house, warmth and light prevailed. Both of them slept soundly, each thinking about the bond that had grown, the trust that had begun, and the changes that were slowly taking root. Neither knew exactly what the future would bring, but they understood that life on the ranch, once predictable and solitary, was now becoming something richer, fuller, and unexpectedly shared. By the time morning arrived, the snowstorm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed. The ranch looked peaceful and pristine, the air crisp and clean. As they began the day, there was a new sense of possibility. The cowboy felt a quiet excitement, a willingness to share not just the work of the ranch, but the small joys and challenges of life itself. The woman, too, felt a deep sense of purpose, knowing that her presence had already begun to make a difference. and that the days ahead held opportunities to strengthen the bond that had formed. And so, part 3 ended not with dramatic confrontations or sudden revelations, but with growth in understanding and trust. The snowstorm had forced them to face challenges together, revealing qualities they had not known in each other before. Emotional vulnerability had begun to emerge, creating a bond based on shared experience, patience, and quiet care. The story was moving steadily forward, showing that life, even in its ordinary moments, could transform when people opened themselves to connection, empathy, and understanding. The morning after the storm was different from any other. The sun rose slowly, casting long golden rays across the snow-covered fields. Everything sparkled as if the world had been freshly polished. The ranch looked alive in a new way, the snow highlighting the curves of the hills, the fences, and the barns. The cowboy stood at the edge of the property, his breath rising in small clouds, and looked out at the beauty around him. For years he had seen this land as work, responsibility, and duty, but today, with the snow shining so bright and someone else by his side, he began to notice its quiet beauty. The woman was already up, bustling in the kitchen as the smell of brewing coffee filled the house. She had a way of bringing warmth and life to everything she touched, from the carefully stacked firewood to the preparation of breakfast. She greeted the cowboy with a smile, noticing the subtle way he seemed to carry himself differently today, less tense, more relaxed, almost thoughtful. He returned a small nod, not fully expressive, but enough to show he recognized her presence mattered. After breakfast, the day's work began. The woman suggested helping with the small repairs on the fence near the eastern pasture. At first, the cowboy hesitated, used to handling everything himself, but he quickly realized she was capable and careful. Together they checked each post, tightened loose nails, and cleared the snow from the gates. As they worked, they talked about the future of the ranch, the animals, and the little improvements that could make life easier during the long winters. The conversation was casual, but beneath it was a growing trust. He realized that not only could he rely on her skills, but he could also share responsibility without feeling his independence threatened. Later in the morning, they encountered a challenge. One of the cows had developed a minor injury to its hoof, likely from stepping on hidden ice under the snow. The cowboy immediately went to tend to it, but the process was slow and careful, requiring both attention and patience. The woman stepped in to assist, holding tools, passing bandages, and speaking softly to the cow to calm it. The cowboy noticed the gentleness in her movements, the careful way she balanced efficiency with empathy. Her presence made the task easier, but more importantly, it reminded him that some things in life were easier when shared. After the cow was settled, they returned to the house to rest. The fire had burned low, leaving a comforting warmth in the room, and the cowboy, usually silent during breaks, spoke of memories long tucked away. He told her about his first days on the ranch, the struggles of learning to manage the land alone, and the quiet moments he had cherished despite the hardships. The woman listened attentively, asking small questions that encouraged him to share more. She did not offer advice or judgment, only interest and understanding. And in that simple act of listening, she brought a sense of relief and companionship he had not realized he needed. By early afternoon, the woman began preparing ingredients for a Christmas dinner they would later share. She organized herbs, sliced vegetables, and stirred sauces with a practiced hand. The aroma filled the house, and the cowboy found himself watching her work, impressed not only by her skill, but also by the care she put into everything. She moved through the kitchen with purpose, but also with a sense of calm, making the space feel welcoming and alive. For the first time in many years, he felt that the home he had built for himself could feel warm, inviting, and shared. Around mid-afternoon, they were interrupted by a visitor from the nearby town, a neighbor who had come to check on the ranch after the storm. The neighbor greeted them warmly, and the cowboy introduced the woman, explaining that she was staying temporarily to help with Christmas preparations. The neighbor's curiosity quickly turned to appreciation as the woman described her plans for meals, decorations, and small improvements to the ranch. The cowboy watched the exchange quietly, noticing how others responded to her energy, friendliness, and competence. It struck him that her influence extended beyond his own home. She was changing the energy of the ranch in ways he had not imagined. After the visitor left, the two returned to work, and the woman suggested they decorate the house for Christmas. She brought out a small box of ornaments, lights, and simple decorations. At first, the cowboy was hesitant. He had never been much for festive displays, but as they worked together, hanging lights and arranging decorations, he found himself smiling and laughing more freely than he had in years. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and the house began to feel less like a solitary cabin and more like a warm home. As evening approached, a small challenge arose that tested their teamwork. A gust of wind had caused one of the barn doors to swing open, threatening to let in the cold and disrupt the animals inside. Without hesitation, the woman ran to assist, holding the door steady while the cowboy secured it. Together, they worked efficiently, a quiet understanding forming between them that words were not necessary to communicate. The task was simple, but the shared effort highlighted the growing connection and mutual reliance that had been building over the past days. Dinner that night was a small celebration of their progress and efforts. The woman had prepared a hearty meal full of flavors and warmth, while the cowboy contributed by setting the table and carving the meat. They ate together by the fire, sharing stories, laughter, and reflections on the day. The cowboy spoke of lessons learned from the past, moments of regret, and his hopes for the future of the ranch. She listened, nodding, offering small comments that encouraged him to continue, always creating a sense of shared understanding and respect. After dinner, the woman suggested a short walk outside to enjoy the crisp winter air and the calm of the snow-covered land. Wrapped in coats and scarves, they walked along the edges of the pasture, noticing the footprints left by animals and humans alike. The cowboy realized he had not taken such a walk in years, and he felt a quiet joy in the shared experience. The conversation was easy, flowing naturally between practical observations, small stories, and moments of reflection. He found himself opening up more than he expected, talking about feelings and thoughts he usually kept to himself. When they returned inside, the fire was crackling, casting a warm glow across the room. The woman suggested they spend the rest of the evening planning the final touches for Christmas. The cowboy agreed, appreciating her energy and ideas. Together they arranged decorations, organized the kitchen, and discussed plans for future meals and traditions. The process was collaborative, creative, and filled with a sense of shared purpose. As the night deepened, the cowboy felt something he had not felt in years: gratitude, not just for the help she had given with work and chores, but for the way she had changed the energy of his home, his routine, and even his thoughts. He realized that her presence had begun to soften the walls he had built around himself, allowing space for companionship, trust, and perhaps even friendship. The woman, lying in her room that night, reflected on the day as well. She understood the strength and resilience it took to run a ranch alone, and she felt a quiet admiration for the cowboy's dedication. But she also saw the small ways he had begun to let her in, through shared stories, laughter, and even simple gestures like allowing her to help with chores. She recognized the power of connection, the importance of patience, and the value of trust, and she felt certain that the bond they were forming could grow into something meaningful and lasting. By the time the morning came, both of them had changed in subtle but significant ways. The cowboy approached the day with a lighter heart, more willing to share tasks and conversation, and more open to the idea that life did not have to be entirely solitary. The woman approached the day with purpose, energy, and a sense of fulfillment, knowing that her presence had already begun to make a difference. Together they had weathered storms, solved challenges, and strengthened a connection that promised to grow. Part 4 ended not with dramatic events or sudden surprises, but with a deepening bond and transformation. The cowboy's life, once rigid and solitary, was beginning to change. The woman's presence had brought warmth, organization, and trust. The ranch itself seemed brighter, livelier, and filled with new energy. And though Christmas had not yet arrived, the foundation for something meaningful and lasting had already been laid, a bond built on respect, shared effort, and the small but powerful moments of everyday life. The morning of Christmas Eve arrived quietly, with soft lights spilling over the snowy fields. The ranch looked magical, every tree, fence, and rooftop dusted in white. The sun reflected off the snow, making the world look bright and alive. The cowboy stood outside, hands tucked into his coat pockets, taking in the view. For years he had seen this land as a place of work and responsibility. Today, though, he saw it differently. It was beautiful, full of potential, and, for the first time in a long while, it felt like a home ready to be shared. The woman was already awake, moving through the kitchen with her usual calm energy. She brewed coffee, prepared breakfast, and started small tasks that would help make the day feel festive. The smell of fresh bread, cinnamon, and coffee filled the house, and the warmth of the fire made the home inviting. The cowboy watched her quietly from the doorway, noticing the gentle efficiency in her movements. She had transformed the house, the routines, and even his perspective, and he could not help but feel gratitude for her presence. After breakfast, they stepped outside to check on the animals. The cold air bit at their cheeks, but the snow made everything feel crisp and clean. The horses, cows, and even the old mule were calm and well-fed, their small tracks marking the snowy fields. As they moved through the ranch together, the cowboy realized how much easier the chores felt with her help. Not only was the work physically lighter, but the experience of sharing tasks created a sense of companionship he had not known he was missing. By late morning, the woman suggested a walk to the small grove at the edge of the property. She wanted to gather branches and pine cones to use in simple Christmas decorations for the house. The cowboy hesitated, unsure if such a leisurely activity was necessary, but he agreed, curious to see her vision. Together they walked through the snow, laughing softly when one of them slipped or stumbled. The grove was quiet, filled with tall trees whose branches sparkled with frost. She carefully selected small pine branches and cones, arranging them in her arms, and explained how they would be placed around the house to bring natural warmth and festive spirit. The cowboy admired her attention to detail and the way she found joy in small, thoughtful touches. Returning to the house, they began decorating. She hung simple garlands along the fireplace, arranged pine cones on the table, and placed candles near the windows. He assisted with moving furniture to create space and stacking firewood neatly for the coming winter nights. The house, once plain and functional, now felt like a home alive with warmth and personality. The cowboy felt an unfamiliar but pleasant sense of pride, not just in his property, but in the life that was unfolding within it. As the afternoon approached, neighbors from the nearby town arrived with small gifts and greetings, curious to see the Christmas preparations. The cowboy greeted them with warmth he rarely displayed, introducing the woman as a valued guest and helper. She responded with graciousness and friendliness, making everyone feel welcome. The energy of the house was alive with conversation, laughter, and shared excitement. The cowboy noticed how much easier it was to connect with others in her presence. Her kindness, openness, and calm energy had created a ripple effect, making the home inviting not only for him, but for everyone around. After the visitors left, the woman suggested they prepare a special Christmas meal together. She guided the cowboy through each step, showing him how simple but meaningful touches could make the meal festive. They worked side by side, laughing when small mistakes happened, like spilling a bit of flour or dropping a vegetable. The cowboy, usually reserved and serious, found himself smiling freely, enjoying the playful moments. By the time the meal was ready, the kitchen was filled with delicious aromas, and the house glowed with warmth and light. As they sat down to eat, the cowboy reflected on the journey of the past few days. He thought about the loneliness he had accepted as part of life on the ranch, the routine that had felt safe but isolating, and the unexpected arrival of someone who had changed everything. The woman had not only brought practical help, but had softened his heart, reminded him of the joy in small moments, and shown him that life could be richer when shared. He felt a deep sense of gratitude, though he struggled to find the right words to express it fully. The woman, noticing his thoughtful expression, spoke gently. "You've built a beautiful life here," she said, "and I can see how much you care about it." The cowboy nodded, appreciating her words. "It's been my life," he replied quietly, "but I didn't realize how empty it could feel alone." She smiled, placing a hand briefly on his arm, a gesture of warmth and connection. "Sometimes it takes someone else to see the light we've forgotten to notice," she said softly. He looked at her and realized she was right. After dinner, they gathered around the fireplace. The cowboy had brought out a small box of family mementos, photos, trinkets, and letters he had kept tucked away for years. The woman helped him organize them, listening to the stories behind each item. As he shared memories of his family, friends, and past Christmases, he felt the weight of years of solitude lifting. Her presence made it easier to remember joy, not just hardship. The house, the ranch, and the snowy world outside all seemed brighter, more alive and full of possibility. As night fell, the snow continued to glisten under the moonlight. The cowboy and the woman stepped outside briefly, enjoying the crisp air and the stillness of the night. The stars shone brightly, and the quiet beauty of the world reminded them both of the simple joys often overlooked in daily life. They walked slowly across the snowy fields, side by side, feeling a peaceful sense of connection. The cowboy realized that, for the first time in years, he did not feel alone. The woman's presence had created not just companionship, but a sense of belonging he had not thought possible. Returning inside, they spent the final hours before bedtime reflecting on the day. The woman prepared a small tray of treats, and the cowboy poured hot cocoa for both of them. They sat near the fire, quietly enjoying the warmth, the light, and the comfort of being together. Words were not necessary. The moments themselves carried meaning. They had faced challenges, shared tasks, and built trust, and in doing so had discovered a connection deeper than either had anticipated. Before going to sleep, the cowboy looked around the house one last time. The decorations, the warm fire, the meals prepared with care, all of it spoke to a life transformed. He realized that the ranch, while still a place of work, was now also a place of joy, warmth, and shared memories. The woman, though she had arrived only to help temporarily, had become an integral part of his life. He understood that her presence had changed him, not just in small ways, but in the way he viewed the world, his home, and even himself. The woman, settling into her room for the night, felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had come to the ranch as a temporary cook, prepared to help with Christmas meals and decorations, but she had witnessed and contributed to something far greater. She had seen the cowboy's walls begin to soften, his heart open, and his life gain a new sense of richness. She realized that even a short stay could leave a lasting impact when care, patience, and understanding were shared. As the night deepened, the house settled into a calm and peaceful rhythm. Outside, the snow-covered fields reflected the light of the moon, and the ranch seemed to breathe with quiet serenity. Inside, two people, once strangers, had discovered a bond that was meaningful, genuine, and transformative. They had shared work, laughter, and quiet reflection, and through those experiences had created a connection that would endure long after the holiday season ended. On Christmas morning, the cowboy awoke to the smell of baking bread and fresh coffee. He walked downstairs to find the woman already preparing breakfast, humming softly. The house felt alive, warm, and inviting. The ranch, once a place of solitude, now seemed full of promise and joy. The cowboy felt a sense of anticipation and happiness he had not experienced in years. He realized that life could be full, rich, and shared, and that even a temporary encounter could leave a permanent mark on the heart. They celebrated the day simply but meaningfully. The meal was hearty, the decorations bright, and the warmth of the fire comforting. They spent the day together, caring for the animals, sharing stories, and appreciating the small joys that came from connection and effort. The cowboy noticed how much easier life felt with someone else to share it with, and the woman felt fulfillment in knowing she had contributed to the happiness of another person's life. By the evening, the cowboy finally spoke words he had kept inside for so long. "You've changed more than this house or these meals," he said quietly. "You've changed my life." She smiled, placing a hand on his arm. "I didn't come here to change you," she replied softly. "I just wanted to help." But sometimes life has a way of surprising us. They shared a quiet smile, both understanding the depth of what had occurred. As the night settled, the house, the ranch, and the snowy world outside seemed to glow with a new warmth. The cowboy and the woman had discovered that even a temporary presence could create lasting change. They had built trust, shared challenges, and discovered joy in everyday moments. The ranch was no longer just a place of work. It was a home, alive with connection, care, and hope for the future. And so, the story ended with quiet celebration and a profound sense of transformation. A woman who came only as a temporary Christmas cook had changed not just the cowboy's holiday, but his life. Through patience, understanding, and shared effort, she had brought warmth, companionship, and joy to a man who had long believed he would always be alone. Life on the ranch would never be the same again, and the bond they had formed promised a future filled with trust, care, and shared memories that would endure for years to come.